So I'm gonna make a video on my views on spirituality, but before I think I can talk about a lot of spiritual stuff, I think I need to say that I've never been to school for spirituality or taken classes on it really, other than watching some videos. So really, I'm not saying that I have all the answers, but I think that your life is the spirituality and how you've lived it. And when you get to a certain point, if you do some inner work, then you can kind of be okay. You can kind of escape the matrix. But to do that, think I need to say, you know, uh, who I am, because I don't have any degrees or anything. But I think that this information could be useful to some people. I would call it spirituality for poor people. So, my name is Reginald Lee Lennon. I was born 1968 in Portland, Oregon. Currently, I'm 54 years old. I'll be 55 in August. And really, I have nothing. I'm broke. So for me, spirituality is not about material things. So I'm if you're looking for someone to try to tell you how to get rich, it's not me. But I can tell you how to feel better about yourself, which I think is the first step to that. So, because I'm really nobody, I think I need to explain my life, because that is the lessons and the spiritual part. So, I'll probably do a lot of bouncing around now and from my childhood. So, I dropped out of high school when I was a sophomore. I live in California. So I'll talk about that part, and then I'll go back earlier in my childhood and when we came here from Oregon. So I dropped out of high school when I was a sophomore, but we lived in campsites, my family and me. So when you tell people you dropped out when you're a sophomore in high school, they kind of already get an assumption of you. But I'll tell you why I made the decision to drop out. So I decided to drop out because at that time, you could only stay in campgrounds for 2 weeks because they didn't want people living there. So you'd have to go to one campsite for 2 weeks, and then you would have to go to another campsite for 2 weeks. But you couldn't go back to the other campsite for 3 weeks. So you could stay there for 2 weeks and you couldn't come back for 3 weeks. So then you had to go to a third campsite. So I'm not going to say that it wasn't fun, because it was, because I was a kid. But it wasn't it wasn't the best thing to be going through when you're in high school. And I went to 4 different high schools in those 3 years. So that is the reason why I decided to drop out, because I didn't want to live in a campground. And as you know, when you're going to school and you just start that school and you're already living in a campground, it's like, you meet people and you're like, hey, what's up? And they're like, hey man, where do you live? So I think out of the embarrassment, I decided to drop out and get a job at Burger King when I was, I don't know, a couple months before I was 15. And so, just so I can already get that out there. So, going to the 4 different schools in the 3 years. So, we moved here from Oregon in 1980 when Mount St. Helens erupted. Because I remember I was 12 years old, and there was, when we lived in Portland, the ash was like snow. It was up to the curb with ash. And even there, we were pretty poor. So I thought moving, might be a better thing. The house that we lived in, they had septic tanks in it. I don't remember. I was like 12 years old. But there was something wrong with it, and we couldn't use the septic tank or we couldn't use the toilet in our house, so we had to have a porta potty, like at a construction job, out front of our house, and we had to live that way. It was been like at least 2 or 3 weeks or something like that. But I remember then Mount St. Helens erupted, and then my brother, who was in the Navy, had came here to San Diego, and so if we were going to move, I guess we that was one of the decisions. When you're 12 years old, you're not really privy to all those things. So we moved here from Portland to Oceanside, California. But in telling you the story of that, I think you have to get a pretty good picture. And so I think I have to be truthful. And some of it's embarrassing, but it's funny now. And to me, that's one of the keys about spirituality, is to see things through humor, even though they might not be the best things. But if you can do that, then somehow you can get through it. So my dad, who I'll talk about later, was not a very good person. And I wouldn't, I mean, he was pretty evil. But I wouldn't say in the way of someone looking. He just was evil, but not in the sense of going around beating up people or he was evil because he was a pedophile. So I won't stay too long on him, but I'll talk about him more because I don't want to get stuck on that. But just so you know the type of person he was. So we moved here in a 1956 Ford pickup, which when you hear that, you think of an old classic car, but it looked more like the Sanford and Son truck. And it had in the back 2 sheets of 4x8 sheets of plywood on the side. And then we are towing a little 16-foot travel trailer. And it was loaded down to the max. I mean, it was loaded up to those 4-foot pieces of plywood. And then on top of that was a 100-year-old rocking chair from Kentucky that was my mom's. So we literally looked like the Beverly Hillbillies coming from Oregon to California in 1982. So it was an eventful trip. And I had a dog. He was a collie. His name was Laddie. So the dog drove with me and my dad, and my sisters were following us in a 1972 Opel GT or Capri or something. But about a month or something before we had left, my brother had borrowed the car and didn't latch the hood, and the hood had flew off of it. And then my brother was in this, he had gotten in trouble with the law. He was in this, back then they had a program called Job Corps, so you could go learn a trade while you were, when you got in trouble. Like, you didn't have to go to jail or whatever. You could go to that school, or probably because he was underage or whatever. But he was in this program where he learned how to do auto body, and then he had did that. And he's like, hey, I'm going to take it there. I'm going to fix it for you. And he never did before we left or before he went into the Navy. So you have a 1956 Ford pickup loaded down to the top with a rocking chair on it and towing a travel trailer loaded down with all your stuff that you had. So it really wasn't like a travel trailer. It was more like we were using it and to tow and to put shit in there too. Then my sisters were in that car that didn't have a hood on it, and they're following us. So we definitely did look like the Beverly Hillbillies. And to make it worse, my dad had took a piece of plywood and cut it for a hood. I think it would have been better not to have a hood than to drive around with a piece of plywood on top of it. But that's how we came here.